I never thought I'd be the kind of man who'd come home early from work to find his wife in bed with another man. Hell, I never thought I'd be the kind of man who'd suspect anything at all. Sarah and I had been married for 8 years, and if you'd asked me that Tuesday morning as I kissed her goodbye, I would have sworn we were solid as concrete. But concrete cracks, done it. It started with little things. Sarah had always been particular about her appearance, but lately she'd been different. New lingerie that I never saw her wear. Perfume that wasn't her usual vanilla scent. She'd started going to the gym more often, claiming she wanted to get back in shape, though she'd always been beautiful to my them. When I complimented her new workout clothes, she'd just shrug and say they were on sale. Then there were the phone calls. Sarah had always been chatty, but these calls were different. She'd take them in the other room, speaking in hushed tones that would stop abruptly when I entered. When I asked who it was, she'd say, just work stuff or my sister, but her sister lived in Portland and Sarah worked as a freelance graphic designer from home. What kind of work stuff required whispered conversations at 9 p.m.? The real red flag should have been how she reacted when I mentioned my boss, Richard Callahan. Rich had been my supervisor at Morrison and Associates for 3 years. He was one of those guys who seemed to have it all, tall, silver-haired, the kind of confident smile that made clients trust him with their life savings. When I'd mentioned something Rich had said or done, Sarah would get this strange look, like she was trying too hard to appear disinterested. "You talk about him a lot," she said one evening as we were washing dishes. "Do I? I mean, he's my boss. We work together every day. Just seems like you think he's pretty great." There was something in her tone, something I couldn't quite place. I should have pressed her about it, but I was distracted by the Henderson account and the possibility of a promotion. Rich had been hinting that if I pulled off the Henderson deal, there might be a junior partnership in my future. I was working 60-hour weeks, coming home exhausted, falling asleep on the couch more often than not. The day everything changed started like any other. I was supposed to be in Chicago for a client meeting, but at the last minute, the client had to reschedule. I called Sarah from the airport to let her know I'd be home early, but it went straight to voicemail. Figured she was probably in the shower or had stepped out to run errands. I caught a cab home instead of the flight to Chicago, thinking maybe Sarah and I could have a quiet evening together. We hadn't had many of those lately. I had picked up her favorite wine on the way, a bottle of that Pinot Grigio she loved from the little Italian place downtown. I was actually feeling optimistic as I climbed the steps to our front door. The house was quiet when I let myself in. Sarah's car was in the driveway, but she wasn't in the living room or kitchen. I called her name, but got no response. I figured she might be taking a nap. She'd been complaining about not sleeping well lately. I was halfway up the stairs when I heard it, a sound that made my blood run cold. Sarah's laugh, but not the way she laughed with me. This was different, intimate. And then I heard the other voice, Rich's voice. I stood frozen on the stairs, the wine bottle still in my hand, my mind trying to process what I was hearing. Maybe they were just talking. Maybe there was some innocent explanation. But even as I told myself that, I knew I was lying to myself. I crept up the remaining stairs, my heart pounding so loud I was sure they'd hear it. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, and what I saw through that gap destroyed 8 years of marriage in an instant. Sarah was in bed with my boss. Not just in bed, they were clearly comfortable with each other, familiar in a way that spoke of more than just a momentary lapse in judgment. This wasn't their first time. The way Rich's hand traced along her arm, the way she curled into his chest, the easy intimacy between them. This had been going on for a while. I should have burst in. I should have confronted them right there. Instead, I found myself backing away, moving like a man in a dream, or maybe a nightmare. I went downstairs, set the wine bottle on the kitchen counter, and sat at the table, staring at nothing. How long had this been going on? How could I have been so blind? All those late nights at the office, all those times Rich had insisted I work late or travel for business. Had he been orchestrating opportunities to be alone with my wife? I sat there for maybe an hour, listening to the sounds from upstairs, feeling like my entire world was collapsing. Finally, I heard movement, voices, the sound of someone getting dressed. I stepped into the pantry and watched through the crack in the door as Rich came downstairs, straightening his tie. "I'll call you later," he said, and I heard Sarah's voice from the top of the stairs. "Be careful, Rick. I don't want David to suspect anything." Rick. She called him Rick. I'd never heard anyone call him that. After Rich left, I waited another 20 minutes before I made my presence known. I walked into the kitchen and opened the refrigerator, grabbing a beer like I'd just gotten home. "David?" Sarah's voice from upstairs. "Is that you?" "Yeah, just got back. Meeting got canceled." She came downstairs a few minutes later, and I studied her face. Her hair was mussed, her cheeks flushed, her lips swollen. She was wearing a robe I'd never seen before, silk, expensive looking. "How was your day?" I asked, taking a long drink of beer. "Oh, quiet. Just worked on some designs for the Peterson account." The lie came so easily. How many lies had there been? How many times had I accepted her explanations without question? Over the next few days, I found myself watching Sarah differently. Every phone call, every trip to the store, every time she was out of my sight, I wondered if she was with him. I started paying attention to Rich at work too, looking for signs, for some indication of what was going on. Rich treated me exactly the same as always. Professional, friendly, occasionally asking about Sarah in that casual way that bosses do. "How's the wife?" he'd say, and I'd want to punch him in the face. But I smiled and said she was fine, and he'd nod and move on to business. I could have confronted them. I could have demanded a divorce, but something held me back. Maybe it was the need to understand how deep this went, or maybe I was just too shocked to act. Instead, I started investigating. I began paying attention to patterns. Sarah's yoga class on Tuesday evenings, her book club on Thursday afternoons. The times she said she was visiting her sister, but came home with no stories about the visit. I started coming home at unexpected times, finding excuses to leave work early or skip meetings. I caught them again 2 weeks later. This time I was ready for it. I'd hidden a small recording device in our bedroom. I know, it sounds paranoid, but I needed proof. I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. The recording was worse than walking in on them. Not just the sounds of their betrayal, but their conversation afterward. "I feel terrible about David," Sarah said. "He's a good guy, but he's not right for you, Sarah. He's too safe, too predictable. Sometimes I think I should just tell him, end this marriage and be with you." "Not yet. I'm still working on the Henderson account. Once that's wrapped up and I'm sure about the promotion, then we can figure out our next steps." "You mean David's promotion?" "Well, that's complicated now, isn't it?" The casual cruelty in his voice was stunning. Rich wasn't just sleeping with my wife. He was using me, manipulating my career, all while planning to take everything I'd worked for. That night, I lay in bed next to Sarah, listening to her breathe, wondering who this woman was that I'd been married to for 8 years. How long had she been unhappy? How long had she been planning this? I started making my own plans. The first thing I did was hire a private investigator. I know it sounds like something out of a movie, but I needed documentation. If this was going to end in divorce, I wanted to be prepared. The PI, a woman named Janet Morrison, was thorough and discreet. Within 2 weeks, she had photographs, recordings, and a detailed timeline of the affair. It had been going on for 6 months. It started at the company Christmas party, apparently. Sarah had been my date, and Rich had been charming and attentive. Too attentive, as it turned out. They'd exchanged numbers that night, and it had escalated from there. But the investigation revealed something else, something that changed everything. Rich was married too. He had a wife, Patricia, and 2 kids. And according to Janet's research, this wasn't his first affair. Rich had a pattern of targeting the wives of his subordinates. Sarah was number 4. The other 3 women had all been discarded once Rich got bored or their usefulness ended. 2 of the marriages had ended in divorce. The third couple had somehow worked it out, but the husband had left the company. I realized then that Rich wasn't just betraying me. He was a predator who used his position of power to destroy families for his own amusement. Sarah wasn't special to him. She was just another conquest. That's when I knew what I had to do. I spent the next month planning. I researched Rich's previous affairs, tracking down the other victims, learning about his patterns. I discovered that he'd been embezzling money from client accounts to fund his lifestyle, expensive hotels, gifts for his mistresses, gambling debts that his salary couldn't cover. The Henderson account that Rich was so focused on? He'd been skimming from it for months, using falsified documents and my signature, forged, of course, to authorize the transfers. If anyone discovered the theft, I would be the fall guy. I also learned that Patricia Callahan, Rich's wife, had been suspicious of his behavior for years. She'd hired her own private investigator twice but had never found concrete proof. Rich was careful, but he wasn't perfect. I made copies of everything: financial records, photos, recordings, email correspondence. I organized it all into a comprehensive file that told the complete story of Rich's predatory behavior and criminal activity. Then I made my move. I didn't confront Sarah or Rich directly. Instead, I did something that nobody expected. I called Patricia Callahan. "Mrs. Callahan, this is David Mitchell. I work with your husband at Morrison and Associates. I think we need to talk." We met at a coffee shop downtown. Patricia was an elegant woman in her 50s with tired eyes that suggested she'd suspected the truth for a long time. I showed her everything: the photos, the recordings, the financial documents. "I'm sorry," I said. "I know this is devastating." She was quiet for a long time, studying the evidence. Finally, she looked up at me. "You know, I've been waiting for this conversation for years. I knew Rick was cheating, but I could never prove it. And the money was given. I wondered where it was all coming from. What do you want to do?" "I want to destroy him." We spent the next 2 hours planning. Patricia, it turned out, was a retired prosecutor. She knew exactly how to handle the evidence I'd gathered and how to make sure Rich faced consequences for both his infidelity and his crimes. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. We would expose everything simultaneously: his affairs, his embezzlement, his pattern of predatory behavior. We would make sure he lost his job, his family, his freedom, and his reputation all at once. But first, we had to protect ourselves and the other victims. Patricia contacted the other wives who had been targeted by Rich. 2 of them were willing to come forward with their stories. Together, we had a pattern of behavior that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. I made copies of all the financial evidence and sent them to the FBI's white-collar crime unit. Embezzlement from client accounts was a federal crime, and the amounts Rich had stolen were substantial enough to guarantee prison time. Then came the hard part. I had to figure out what to do about Sarah. I could have just handed her the divorce papers and walked away. But I realized that Sarah was as much a victim of Rich's manipulation as anyone else. He'd targeted her specifically because she was vulnerable. I'd been working long hours, we'd been growing apart, and she'd been feeling neglected and unappreciated. That didn't excuse what she'd done, but it helped me understand it. I decided to give her one chance to come clean. I came home early on a Thursday, one of her book club days. She wasn't there, of course. I waited until she returned, and when she walked in, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of wine and a manila envelope. "How was book club?" I asked. "It was good. We're reading, The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo." "Interesting choice. What did you think of it?" She looked uncomfortable. It was about the price of secrets and how they can destroy relationships." "Funny you should mention that." I slid the envelope across the table. Sarah stared at it for a long moment before opening it. Inside were selected photos from the PI's investigation. Sarah and Rich at a hotel, Sarah and Rich at a restaurant across town, Sarah and Rich in our bed. Sarah's face went white. Her hands shook as she looked through the photos. "David, I can explain." Can you explain 6 months of lies? 6 months of betrayal? Can you explain why you're sleeping with a man who's been embezzling money from his clients and using forged documents with my signature?" That last part was news to her. I could see it in her eyes. "What are you talking about?" "Rich has been stealing money, Sarah, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And when the FBI investigates, and they will, I'm going to be the prime suspect because my signature is on the authorization documents." "That's impossible. Rick would never—" "Rick? You still call him Rick even now?" She started crying then. Real tears, not the crocodile tears I'd expected. She was genuinely shocked about the embezzlement. I didn't know, she whispered. I swear to you, David, I didn't know about any of that. But you knew about the affair. You knew you were destroying our marriage. Yes, I knew that. Why? She was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. Because he made me feel important. He made me feel desired. You were always at work, always focused on your career, and I felt like I was disappearing. Rick saw me, he listened to me. He made me feel alive again. So you decided to sleep with him. I didn't plan it, it just happened. And then it kept happening. And I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't stop. I was addicted to the way he made me feel. And you never thought about what it would do to me? Every day. I thought about it every day. I hated myself for it, but I couldn't stop. I believed her. As angry as I was, as hurt as I was, I believed that she hadn't meant for things to go as far as they had. Rich was a master manipulator, and Sarah had been his victim as much as his accomplice. What happens now, she asked. That depends on you. I told her about the plan Patricia and I had developed. Rich was going to be arrested within the week. His affairs were going to be exposed. His career was over, and he was probably going to prison. You have a choice, I said. You can continue this relationship with a man who's going to jail, or you can try to save our marriage. You'd be willing to try? I don't know, but I'm willing to find out on one condition. What? Complete honesty about everything. No more lies, no more secrets. If we're going to try to rebuild this, it has to be on a foundation of truth. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'll do anything, David. I'll do whatever it takes. The next week was a whirlwind. The FBI arrested Rich at his office on a Wednesday morning. The local news picked up the story by evening. Prominent financial advisor arrested for embezzlement and fraud. The affair allegations surfaced a day later, along with stories from the other wives he'd targeted. Rich's world collapsed completely. Patricia filed for divorce and got a restraining order. The company fired him and banned him from the premises. His clients fled in droves. Within a week, he went from respected businessman to social pariah. Sarah was devastated. Whatever fantasy she'd been living was shattered by the reality of who Rich really was. She'd been played, manipulated, used, and discarded just like the other wives. But something unexpected happened. Instead of pushing us further apart, the truth brought us closer together. We started couples therapy immediately. Sarah was completely honest about the affair, about her feelings, about why she'd made the choices she'd made. I was honest about my own failures, how I'd neglected our marriage, how I'd taken her for granted, how I'd been so focused on my career that I'd forgotten about the woman I'd married. It wasn't easy. There were days when I didn't think we'd make it, days when the betrayal felt too fresh, too raw. But gradually we began to rebuild. The company offered me Rich's position. They wanted to distance themselves from the scandal, and promoting the victim, me, was good for their image. I turned it down. Instead, I used the experience to launch my own financial consulting firm. Several of Rich's former clients came with me, drawn by the story of how I'd exposed the corruption and protected their interests. Within 6 months, I was making more money than I ever had at Morrison & Associates. But the most unexpected part of this whole story was what happened with Patricia Callahan. She and I had become friends through our shared experience. She'd been incredibly supportive during the investigation and the aftermath. We'd meet for coffee occasionally, comparing notes on our respective healing processes. One afternoon, about 8 months after Rich's arrest, Patricia and I were having lunch when she said something that surprised me. You know, David, I've been thinking about what you said that first day we met, about how you never expected to be the kind of man who'd come home to find his wife cheating. Yeah? I never expected to be the kind of woman who'd be grateful for that betrayal. What do you mean? I mean that discovering Rick's affair was the best thing that ever happened to me. It freed me from a marriage that was slowly killing me. It showed me that I was stronger than I thought I was. It gave me my life back. That's a pretty healthy way to look at it. What about you? Any regrets about how you handled things? I thought about it for a moment. You know what? No, I don't have any regrets. I could have handled it the traditional way, stormed upstairs, confronted them. demanded a divorce, but instead I chose to be strategic. I chose to make sure that justice was served, that the truth came out, and that everyone involved had to face the consequences of their actions. Even Sarah? Even Sarah. She had to face the truth about what she'd done and who she'd done it with. She had to confront the reality of her choices. And because of that, we were able to rebuild our marriage on a foundation of honesty instead of just sweeping everything under the rug. Patricia smiled. You're a good man, David Mitchell. Sarah's lucky to have you. I'm the lucky one. And I meant it. The affair had been devastating, but it had also been transformative. It had forced both Sarah and me to confront our problems, to communicate honestly, to fight for our marriage instead of just coasting through it. Rich, meanwhile, was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. His law license was revoked, his assets were seized to pay restitution to his victims, and his name became synonymous with corruption and betrayal in our community. But here's the thing that nobody expected, the twist that even I didn't see coming. 2 years later, Patricia and I were having our usual coffee when she mentioned that she was thinking about dating again. That's great, I said. You deserve to be happy. Actually, she said, I was wondering if you'd be interested. I stared at her. Are you asking me out? I think I am. Patricia, I'm married. Sarah and I worked things out, remember? I know, but I also know that you and Sarah are still having problems. I can see it in your eyes, David. You've forgiven her, but you haven't forgotten, and you never will. She was right. Despite all our therapy, despite all our efforts to rebuild, there was still a part of me that couldn't fully trust Sarah. Every time she was late coming home, every time she took a phone call in another room, every time she seemed distracted or distant, I wondered if she was cheating again. Sarah's a good person who made a terrible mistake, Patricia continued. But some mistakes can't be undone. Some trust can't be fully restored. You both deserve better than a marriage built on constant suspicion and doubt. So what are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that maybe it's time to consider that staying married isn't always the right choice. That sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to let each other go. I went home that night and had the most honest conversation Sarah and I had ever had. I told her about Patricia's offer, about my own doubts, about the way I still sometimes looked at her and wondered if she was lying to me. I love you, I said, but I don't trust you, and I don't think I ever will again, not completely. Sarah was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, I know, I can see it in your eyes. No matter what I do, no matter how hard I try, you're always going to be waiting for me to betray you again. I don't want to feel that way. But you do, and I understand why. What I did was unforgivable, even if you've forgiven me. So what do we do? Maybe we admit that love isn't always enough. Maybe we admit that some wounds are too deep to heal completely. We filed for divorce 6 months later. It was amicable, even loving in its way. We divided our assets fairly, and we both agreed that we wanted the best for each other, even if that meant being apart. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday in April. That Saturday, I took Patricia to dinner at the same Italian restaurant where I'd bought Sarah's favorite wine the day I discovered the affair. Are you sure about this? I asked Patricia as we looked over the menu. I'm sure, she said. The question is, are you? I thought about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the investigation, the choice to fight for truth instead of just revenge, the decision to rebuild instead of just destroy, the courage to start over when rebuilding wasn't enough. Yeah, I said, I'm sure. We were married 8 months later, not because we were trying to get back at our ex-spouses, but because we'd found something real in the aftermath of all that betrayal and pain. We'd found each other. Sarah moved to Portland to be near her sister. She sent me a card on my wedding day. It said, I'm happy for you. You deserve all the love in the world. I kept the card, not because I was still in love with Sarah, but because it reminded me that sometimes the most unexpected endings are the most beautiful ones. Rich got out of prison after serving 3 years. He moved to another state, changed his name, and as far as I know, he's working as a used car salesman somewhere in Ohio. Some people never learn, but I learned something important from the whole experience. When life throws you a curveball, you have a choice. You can react with anger and violence, or you can respond with intelligence and strategy. You can seek revenge, or you can seek justice. You can destroy, or you can rebuild. I chose to rebuild, and in the process, I discovered that sometimes the most devastating betrayals can lead to the most incredible transformations. Patricia and I have been married for 3 years now. We have a beautiful life together, built on honesty, trust, and the shared understanding that love is a choice you make every day, not just a feeling you have. And that, I think, is the most unexpected ending of all.